pleasure to welcome Oche Anderson to Comix Foundry 2024. How has your 2024 been?
Oh, that's a question and a half. It has been eventful, let us say. Yeah, let's move on.
And you're in Hamilton. What does Hamilton mean to you? I know you're fond of the region. Why is it such a special place for you?
I don't know. The first time I came here, I just got a good vibe from the place. I just really kind of liked it immediately. Oh, it's interesting. My very first time in Hamilton, I came here for a job interviews right after I got out of film school, and I came here for an editing job, and it turned out to be a fake editing job. And I think that the person who brought us here was kind of lurking somewhere because he gave us a fake address. I went to this address, it did not exist. And I went to a McDonald's after wandering around in the cold for about an hour. Finally realized it didn't exist and I'd wasted my time. I heard a whole bunch of dudes talking about the job interview that they were going for an editor position that also didn't exist, and we'd all gotten rooked. So I don't know what that's all about. That was my first intro to Hamilton, but despite that, I still think it's a beautiful town.
Excellent. So what's your origin story when it comes to getting into comic books and being a creator?
Star Wars. I've probably told this story about 1,000 times until 1001. When I was a child, my mom took me to see Star Wars, and I absolutely fell in love with it. The idea of visual storytelling, of science fiction, just that whole world. It was sort of like I was one kid before we went into the cinema, and I was a different person when I came out of the cinema, and I've kind of lived in those waters ever since. But the thing is, even though movies were the initial inspiration, there were no cameras or anybody, I didn't know anybody who was involved with film in any way. So the next best thing was comic books. That was still pictures telling stories. And also there was a Star Wars adaptation that I had fallen in love with. So they all kind of fed off each other, and kind of this fascination was born.
Now, did that inspire you to make your own versions of Star Wars?
Absolutely.
When you were a kid?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, a good friend of mine and myself created something called Empire, which shockingly enough, oh, we lost the lady already. Goodbye, man. Was like a ripoff of The Empire Strikes Back, surprisingly enough. And yeah, we thought we were being original with this story, but we were not. We were shamelessly ripping off George Lucas's creation.
And so then when did it dawn on you that it was something that you could do once you got older? Did you have any hurdles?
Yeah.
Because I can just tell you, not to make this about me, but being from West Indian heritage, I know that I had a huge love of comic books. I love Star Wars as well too.
Right.
But my parents were like, no. Go get a respectable gig.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Well, my parents were also, no, go get a respectable gig. But I don't know. I just kind of, I've always been the kind of person who's going to follow his own muse. It's my life. I mean, they can't live it for me. They can't be policing me 24/7. So I just kind of followed my own muse.
And then when it came to that first gig, what was it?
First gig, there used to be a company called Comico back in, I think they started in the late 70s. They were definitely around in the 80s when I got into comics. And I didn't realize it until later on, but they were kind of, they were a publisher that was designed to kind of bring people into the industry. They'd bring newcomers in, pay them a couple of bucks, get them to do a ton of work for free sometimes. I had both experiences, getting paid and not getting paid. But there was a chance for like a newbie to come in and get some work published and build a career. And I started doing, I don't know if, I'm sure people in this room are familiar with Grendel, Matt Wagner's creation of Grendel. I started doing Grendel comics like when I was 18. That was like my first paid gig. And it was amazing after years of kind of just wanting to see my name on a comic book and my pictures in the book, and to finally like get that first comp copy was just an amazing. I still remember that excitement. I showed it to my mom. She didn't care, but I was excited.
And when you look back at Grendel and you look at kind of like the beginnings of your experiences in comic books,
Yes.
What was like the biggest surprise in terms of moving out of what you thought the industry was and what you thought being a freelance artist would be, and then the realities of it?
That's a great question. Probably, it's one thing, I was put a lot of pressure on myself. I was never, motivation has never been difficult for me. I've always gotten up in the morning and done what I needed to do, spent the day perfecting what I was working on. But it's one thing when you're putting that pressure on yourself, and it's a different thing when you've got external forces putting pressure on you, and there was money involved, even at the low level that Comix was paying back in the day. It's just a different thing. So I suddenly felt the need to become a professional. That kind of forces you to change your mindset a little bit. It goes from being a hobby or whatever to a job with responsibilities. And so that was a little bit of an adjustment, but not too much. Actually, kind of after a while, I realized I liked that pressure, and I liked that sense of kind of being involved and of having other people with expectations on what I was doing. It made me feel like I was part of a team. I was contributing to a larger endeavor than just my own particular interests.
And how did that change not only just your output, but also your approach to like pages when you got a script?
It just changes. It just makes you. It forces you to think more like a professional. Before that, if I didn't feel like working, I just didn't work. I go out and hang out with friends, get drunk, did a lot of that. And but when I became a pro, I became much more disciplined. That's really the main thing. Just treating it as forgetting that it's treating it like it's like a job, like a full-time, actual profession as opposed to just a fun thing to do.
And did that kind of rein in your risk-taking creativity?
No.
Or did it allow you to kind of flourish?
It actually kind of kickstarted the creativity. I realized that I had a little tiny bit of an audience, and it's very energizing knowing that you have eyeballs on your work. I think maybe for some people it might kind of inspire a bit of fear. Maybe they might shrink a little bit knowing that people are going to be judging the work. But I always found it really kind of exciting. I have views and audience, and you think you know what you're going to get, but I'm going to challenge you from time to time. I'm going to surprise you here and there. That was invigorating for me. And I also realized that there was like a world of possibilities within our medium. You can do anything you want.
And so being a Black creator, did that change not only your creative process, but any inspirations that you look to?
No, my creative process, no. The thing is, when I started out, I knew that there had been the occasional Black creator throughout comics. But I wasn't really aware, and these were figures from, some of them were contemporary, like Keith Pollard was the guy I was working when I started out, Dennis Cowan, obviously. But then there were people like Billy Graham from the past that I was unaware of until later on. And other figures, and I for a long, long time, I thought, I'm like the one brother in the entire comic book industry. And I never tried to shy away from that. I was leaned into it. But I also was aware that was going to be potentially a limiting factor. I never let that stop me. I was doing what I wanted to do. I've always been highly ambitious, but I always knew that was going to be, it's going to hold me back a little bit. And it has, to be honest.
Because it's like the one thing that I noticed, we'll get to King because I want to talk about that a little bit. But one thing that I've noticed just as a fan is that of comics in general, that usually when you have a Black creator, they get the Black character.
Yeah, totally.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, editors don't tend to have very much imagination. They see your surface. I'm sure this is true for women cartoonists as well. They probably only get the female characters to draw. I'm sure in some cases that's what they would prefer to draw. I'm often very comfortable drawing Black characters, but it would be nice to be able to break out of that box. I started doing some work for Marvel Comics a few years ago, and the one character that I got my hands on that was a non-black character was Spider-Man. Super fun to write, enjoyed the hell out of it, would like to do more. But usually it's Blade or it's Luke Cage or it's whomever. I'm not complaining about that. I'm happy to do the job and to do the work and to have it work. But it would be nice if there was if the box wasn't so confined.
And so, getting back to being a black creator, when you take on a project like King, is there an added responsibility throughout the whole project?
Yes, I actually kind of took it upon myself to ignore that responsibility to a large extent because I just found that was going to be, I felt that would be a little stifling creatively if you're always concerned about how you're going to be perceived, are you doing justice to the character? At the same time, I was painfully aware that this was a cultural figure of great significance and that a lot of eyeballs potentially would be on this particular work, and that given his cultural significance and his importance, that the work needed to be approached with a certain level of just respect, So that's you can't kind of tell King's story in a half-assed way. You need to do the research and understand his philosophy and bring that to bear on what you're doing. And that didn't stop me from having some fun here and there. I was a younger man when I was working on that book, and there were a few little things in the margins that, perhaps I wouldn't do today. I'm not going to mention anything, but there's a couple of panels in there where I'm like, maybe I wouldn't draw that anymore. But I reserve the right to kind of have fun and to bring my own, personal quirks and sensibility to the material. Because nobody's reading that stuff. Yes, you're reading the comic to get a sense of who King was, but you always want to have the creator's voice in there. Otherwise, just have it be done by AI. I never shied away from putting myself into the King work.
And then when you went to write novels, how did not having visuals as part of your storytelling apparatus then affect how you produce what you make?
The weird thing is, this is kind of a strange thing to say, but there's an interview from way back in 1983 with the cartoonist Dave Sim and his wife at the time and publisher Benny Bear, who I got to meet at TCAF recently, and it was absolutely awesome. And at any rate, during this interview, the interviewer asked, maybe Dave brought it up himself, I forget how it came about, but at any rate, Dave made a comment that he felt that he was more of a writer who drew as opposed to an artist who wrote. It was kind of a weird way to approach the work in a sense, but it resonated for me. And I've always kind of felt more drawn to the writing side of it, to the conceptual side of it. It just so happens that I got lucky and that I'm a pretty decent artist on top of it. For me, words have always come extremely easy. There's never been a struggle getting dialogue out or prose out or journalism out or anything that I've written. So I've been lucky that way. So it felt very natural when I've stepped away from the visuals. It's actually kind of nice to just not have to. Sometimes as cartoonists, it can, it's like anything else. If you do the same thing, it can become a little bit rote. And it's nice sometimes, as somebody who writes and draws most of their stuff, to not be an artist sometimes, or not to be a writer sometimes. It's nice to get somebody else's script occasionally and, put my sensibility into their idiom.
And there's also a different kind of sweat equity, and this isn't to disparage any side of the creative process.
Absolutely.
But writing a page versus drawing what's on that page,
Yes, sir.
It's like a 10x kind of thing.
Absolutely correct.
So,
it take you half an hour to write a page and 3 days to draw that son of a bitch.
So then when you're doing your prose, are you then not more free, just I don't want to draw a car, but now I can write about the car and go into detail. Does that change things for you?
Well, the writer in me has never shied away from challenging the artist in me, so I have to kind of have a little fun knowing that I'm going to be torturing myself later on. It's like, I'm going to write a massive crowd scene with 100 cars and horses and explosions in the background. Amazing to write. Fuck, I got to draw this goddamn thing later on. So I don't mind putting stuff in that I'm going to have a little bit of trouble with later on. But what's nice is, as a writer in comics, your work is it's not meant to be read. It's meant to be absorbed by an editor, by the artist, but nobody reads a script. A comic book writer without an artist is just throwing out words that nobody's ever going to read. It's nice when you actually write prose or journalism or whatever. The words are the thing. It's a complete piece unto itself. That's kind of nice. That's a nice feeling.
And we're now going to transition into film. When I think of comic books, when I think of film or movies, I think they're the same, just one static and one isn't.
Interesting.
And also, the crew is a lot smaller.
A lot smaller.
A lot smaller.
And the budgets.
And the budgets, absolutely. So when you are, as a filmmaker, what was your biggest kind of takeaway moving into it? Was there a fear that you conquered? Or was it something where you're like, I'm actually freed from some of the shackles of either writing prose or making comics?
Yeah, I mean, it's I love comics for comics. Before I started before I picked up a camera and started to make stuff, I did have a bit of movement envy in comics and sound envy. In films. I had sound envy. Being able to move an image around is exciting, and being able to combine that moving image with a sound is also incredibly exciting. Those two things are lost in comics, or they just don't exist in comics. Before I picked up a camera, I was always kind of looking for the ways that I could make little movies on the page. As soon as I did pick up a camera and started working with crews, that all immediately went away. And I started to become more and more invested in what exists entirely on the page, what comics can do that only comics can do. And so that's really great. But one of the great things about getting into film was being able to work with other people. I like the fact that I can go home, go to my studio, be entirely creative on my own terms, not have to answer to anybody, and then the next day go on a set and I've got gear that I'm working with and amazing actors to work with and a DP and whomever else. That's really great, being able to be creative with a whole posse, and the gear is exciting to work with too.
And so did you train for film, or was it something that you just jumped into?
I jumped in first. Me and my friend and my buddy, we made 20-minute short films before I got into film school. Then after that, I went to the Toronto Film School and then Sheridan Film School. And then I joined IATSE, the Motion Picture Union. So I had an interesting trajectory. The thing about movie making is I didn't want to kind of be a tourist. I wanted to really learn the craft from the ground up, and then so when I finally was on a set, I felt like, okay, I belong, as opposed to just some jerk who's parachuted in. So so going to film school was incredibly helpful. Still work with a lot of the same people today. Highly invaluable experience. The thing is, I kind of wish I'd had that experience with comics too, because I'm jealous of people I used to watch Cartoonist Kayfabe a lot. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that YouTube show. Stopped watching it in the wake of one of the hosts, what happened with him. But I used to watch that show a lot, and one of the hosts at Piscor talked a lot about how he'd gone to I think it was the School of Visual Arts.
With the
Kubrick School. Thank you. And I really was jealous of that experience because my comic school was on the page. It was on the printed page. So every horrible mistake that I made is still out there for all to see and make fun of me for. And I make fun of myself for a lot of those mistakes. But it would have been great to have made all those same mistakes, which I was going to make anyway, but do it in a class environment, get it out there where it's never going to really be seen, and then have the premium work, have that stuff grace the page. Didn't work out for me that way. But yeah, it is what it is.
And are we gonna get more films from you?
Yeah, so the last thing that I directed was this was a movie called Le Corbeau, which is where I learned the true value of having the right collaborators, because I was unfortunately stuck with the wrong collaborator on that project, and we kind of paid the price. Since then, my filmmaking has kind of been confined mostly to screenwriting, which has been wicked fun. Pays awesome. Not so much fun though as being on a set and directing and be working with the crew and everybody. So I'm trying to get back on the set as a director.
Perfect. And I'm going to wrap up pretty soon, and I'd like to go back to comics in a way.
Absolutely.
I've heard that you're looking at a project with the Canadian Whites.
Oh yeah, that's one of the things on the slate.
Can you give us some more information about what that is exactly?
It's kind of the least developed of the stuff that I'm working on, so not a whole lot to report at this point, but there's I don't know how many people are in this room are familiar with the Canadian Whites, but they were black and white comic books that were created during the Second World War. I forget exactly what the act was, the War Conservation Act, I think it was, something like that, where goods from the United States and from all over the world stopped being imported into Canada. And so that kind of included comics, so that opened up a window where we could publish our own comics. They called them Canadian Whites, so it's a kind of a dicey title today, to be honest, because they started out in color, and then they realized that it was just cheaper and more expeditious to get the things out there in black and white. And there was a character in those comics called the Penguin. Not the Penguin from DC Comics, he was kind of like a Batman light. He wore a tuxedo and he drove a fancy car. We never saw his face, which I loved because it kind of allowed me to put my own identity into him. But he wore a penguin mask. He wore a goofy looking like a balaclava with a giant beak on the front. Kind of ridiculous, but so cool. Like I loved that character as a child, and I continue to love him today. And I had an idea for a story, a World War II set story. About him kind of facing off against a war criminal that turns out to be a serial killer, but it's still in the works. There's other stuff that's ahead of it with you.
And with regards to the Whites, is there anything about the subject matter of that time period? Because obviously, like look at like some of the Warner Brothers cartoons, and they're a product of their time.
Yes.
Right, and there are versions that I saw that I would have seen being at a certain age, born in 1971, that are totally edited now, or even some that you just can't see anymore.
Interesting.
Are there any aspects of the Whites that carry some of that kind of legacy as well as burden that you've encountered in your research?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of horrific racial stereotypes. I mean, this is wartime, so Japanese people were not well represented, let us say, in the Canadian Whites. A lot of horrible Japanese stereotypes, a lot of coon stereotypes. There's a lot of that stuff going on in those comics. You know what? I don't judge that material through today's lens. That stuff was created in the 1940s. People were with a certain mindset at that point, and quite willing to express that mindset. I think that's fine. That's what it was, and I don't think that should be censored or painted over or anything. I think these are valuable historical documents for what they are. Now, if I wind up doing this penguin story, am I going to continue those horrible Japanese and black stereotypes? Hell no. Those characters are going to have the dignity and respect that they deserve. But I would never go back and say, get rid of those old comics, or don't republish them, or censor these panels, or whatever. None of that business.
Yeah, when you think of like Huck Finn or like Tintin, those kind of books, like I loved Tintin. Like when we had Scholastic.
Crazy racist.
What? On another level.
Absolutely.
But I was dying for whenever we had a Scholastic book fair, because I could go in and dive in and get a new edition. But then when you see some of the portrayals, there's that ick cringe factor. But then that where you're conflicted as a not only a consumer but also a cartoonist is you can't throw, for lack of a better expression, the baby out with the bathwater. And so you look at what those are almost like the building blocks, and sometimes the foundations of the houses we're in are shaky, but it doesn't mean that you have to knock down the entire house.
Absolutely correct. Totally agree.
Right? And so if you can kind of reimagine those things, because even the Superman of today is not the Superman of 1936 or whatever it was he debuted, but to not have that character and then what has spawned from that, I think is a loss for all of us.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah. No notes.
Okay, great. And so, past the Lights project that you're working on with the Penguin, what can we look forward to from you next?
I can't say. Sorry, what's that about?
Romance comics.
Who Oh, romance comics. Yeah, that's correct. The thing is, I figured, so my last book was a sci-fi comic called Godhead, and after that, I started doing writing a bunch of scripts, film scripts. So I've kind of been out of the comics game for like a year and a bit now. But I've been working very hard to set up some new projects. But it's sort of they're in the stage where I can't really talk about them at this point. But as my good friend Robin just said, one of them is a romance comic that I want to do. I just always loved romance comics when I was a younger person. Not so much when I was a kid, but when I got big into Love and Rockets when I was a teenager, and which I always just thought of as romance soap opera essentially. I've spoken to the publisher Gary Groth about that, and he's like, "It is not a soap opera." I'm like, "Gary, you're wrong."
Gary's too hard.
Gary's a hard man, but I always loved kind of slice of life stories. Everybody loves love. Everybody needs love, and there's a lot that I feel like I could do with the romance genre. That's one of the things I'm hoping to work on in the next little while. Yeah, but I think probably the next thing that I'm going to do is probably going to be either a YA book or a series of biographies, like short biographies. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I'm totally looking forward to what you're going to come up with. Well, okay, I'd like to really thank you for your time this afternoon. Audience, thank you for your time as well too.
Thanks for coming, folks. Big time. Appreciate it.